I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Imagine you are 18 years old. You are sitting alone in a room that doesn't belong to you, in a house that never truly felt like home, wearing a smile you have practiced so many times in the mirror that it no longer reaches your eyes. You have a secret, one so heavy, so enormous, so terrifying that you have carried it pressed against your ribcage every single day for years, afraid that if you breathe too deeply, it might escape and destroy everything you've ever known. That was me. That was me on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in late October, sitting on the edge of a guest bed, staring at a crack in the ceiling plaster, wondering how a person can feel so completely, devastatingly alone in a house full of people. And then the door opened. He walked in. And I want you to understand, nothing about what happened next was what I expected, not a single moment, not one breath of it, because what walked through that door wasn't danger. It wasn't my worst nightmare finally arriving to collect what it was owed. What walked through that door was the very first person in my entire 18 years of life who would look me in the eyes, really look at me, and say the four words I had been silently starving for since I was old enough to understand what it meant to be different. He said, "I see you, Adam." And I broke apart. Right there, right then, completely and without warning. I had spent my entire life building walls, thick ones, tall ones, walls made of silence and carefully constructed performances, and practiced laughter and yes ma'am no sir and straight-A report cards and football jerseys I never wanted to wear. And in one sentence, four small, ordinary words, every single brick came down. This is that story. This is the story of how one unexpected Tuesday afternoon became the hinge point of my entire existence. This is the story of how I went from a boy who was slowly, quietly disappearing into himself to a man who finally learned to take up space. Stay with me because I promise you, by the time this story ends, you will never look at a closed door the same way again. Let me take you back, way back, before the door opened, before he walked in, before any of it. I need to take you to where this story actually begins, and it doesn't begin in that guest room. It begins in a small, sun-faded kitchen in a town you've never heard of, where a 7-year-old boy sat at a yellow Formica table eating cereal and accidentally said the wrong thing. The cereal was corn flakes. I remember because I remember everything about that morning. I remember the milk being slightly too warm because we'd run out of cold. I remember the electric fan clicking every third rotation like a metronome, keeping time with my heartbeat. I remember my father's newspaper, the way he held it like a fortress wall between himself and the rest of the world. And I remember what I said. My older brother Marcus was talking about a girl from school, Jessica somebody, going on and on about her hair and how she smelled like strawberries. And I, being 7 years old and still gloriously innocent and not yet educated in the particular dangers of honesty, piped up from behind my bowl of cornflakes and said, "Tommy Weston smells nice too, like pine trees and rain." The newspaper lowered. Slowly. My father looked at me over the top of it with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something caught between confusion and a low, quiet alarm, like he'd heard a sound in the walls of the house and wasn't sure yet whether it was something small and harmless or something that was going to cost him. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for a long, airless moment, then the newspaper went back up. But something had shifted. I was 7 years old and I felt it in my stomach the way you feel the first cold wind of autumn, that unmistakable signal that the warm season is over, that something is ending, that you should prepare yourself. I didn't know what I'd said wrong, I genuinely didn't. Tommy Weston sat behind me in 2nd grade and he was kind and he let me borrow his colored pencils and I thought he smelled like outside and Christmas trees. What was wrong with that? But I learned something that morning at the yellow Formica table. I learned it the way children learn the most important lessons, not through words but through silence, through the quality of the air in a room, through a newspaper going back up. I learned that some things you feel, you keep to yourself. The next few years were a masterclass in observation. I became a scientist of human behavior, watching, cataloging, measuring. I watched which boys got laughed at and which ones got celebrated. I watched what made my father's face do that thing, that tightening around the eyes, that particular stillness, and I filed it carefully away under the category of things never to do again. By the time I was 10, I had constructed a version of myself that was almost completely convincing. I played Little League even though I hated it. I talked about superheroes and video games even though what I really wanted to do was draw in my sketchbook and listen to my mother's old Celine Dion records alone in my room. I learned to laugh at jokes that made my insides go cold and quiet. I was very, very good at it. Marcus, my brother, 3 years older, was the golden one. He was naturally everything my father wanted in a son. Loud, athletic, confident, comfortable in his own skin in that effortless way some people are, like they arrived in the world already fully assembled. Marcus wasn't cruel to me. He just lived in a completely different universe, one where everything came easily, where belonging felt natural, where nobody had to practice. I worshipped him and I envied him in equal measure. Our father, Robert, worked in construction management. He was a large man, not fat but solid, built like something meant to withstand weather. He coached Marcus's baseball team. He talked about cars and college football and what kind of man you're going to be, with a certainty that suggested he had already decided the answer and was simply waiting for reality to catch up. He wasn't a monster. I want to be clear about that because this story isn't about a monster. He was a man who had learned a very specific and narrow idea of what goodness looked like, and he loved his sons with the full force of that narrow idea. Which is its own kind of pain, isn't it? To be loved by someone whose love has conditions they don't even know they've set. My mother, Patricia, was softer. She was the one who left glasses of milk and cookies outside my bedroom door when she heard me crying. She never knocked. She knew I would deny it. She just left them there like small, quiet offerings, and I would open the door after a few minutes and find them, and somehow that was enough, the knowledge that someone knew, even if we never spoke about it. My mother was my safe harbor in a sea I was only beginning to understand I was drowning in. Middle school arrived like a natural disaster. If elementary school is where you learn the rules, middle school is where the rules get weaponized. Everything about your body becomes evidence in a trial where the verdict has already been decided. Are you too thin? Too soft? Do you laugh wrong, stand wrong, walk wrong? Do your hands flutter when you talk? Do your eyes linger too long in gym class? Mine did. I was 13 when I first understood, not in theory, not as an abstract concept I'd heard whispered about, but in my body, in my blood, in the undeniable biological reality of being alive, that I was gay. I'm not going to dramatize the moment of realization because honestly, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. It was a Tuesday afternoon. There's that day again. Tuesdays have always been significant in my life, I've decided, and I was sitting in study hall and a boy named Daniel Reyes walked past my desk, and something happened inside my chest that I had never felt before. Not excitement exactly, more like recognition. Like something that had been quietly waiting finally stood up and said, "Oh, so that's what you are." I spent the next hour staring at the same page of my history textbook, not reading a single word, trying to unfeel what I had just felt, trying to push it back down, back under, back into the category of things that don't exist. It didn't work. It never works, I know that now. I know it's never worked for anyone, but you try anyway because the alternative is terrifying and terror is a very powerful motivator. So I tried harder to disappear into my performance. I got better at baseball. I started dating Sarah Hennessy in 8th grade because she asked me and because I thought maybe, if I just did this, if I just played this part convincingly enough, the other thing would go away. Sarah was sweet. She had freckles and she laughed at everything and she held my hand in the hallways and I felt nothing, and every day I hated myself a little more for it. We dated for 4 months. I broke up with her by writing a note because I couldn't look at her face when I did it. She cried in the bathroom for an hour. I heard about it from 3 different people before the day was over. That was the first time I really understood that closets have victims on both sides of the door. High school. God, high school. I transferred to Riverside High when my family moved across town the summer before 9th grade, and I made a decision, a cold, deliberate, calculated decision, that I was going to be someone different here. Someone who didn't have to hide because there would be nothing to find. I was going to become so thoroughly, convincingly normal that even I would eventually believe it. I joined the football team, wide receiver, because I was fast and I had good hands even if I had zero passion for the game. I made friends, real ones or at least real seeming ones. Guys who clapped me on the back and called me man and talked about girls constantly in that exhausting, performative way that I now understand was its own kind of performance. We were all performing for each other. None of us knew it. I was popular. I want to say that plainly without false modesty because it matters to the story. I was the kind of popular that comes from athletic ability and a carefully calibrated sense of humor, the ability to be funny without being threatening, cool without being arrogant. I knew how to read a room. I knew how to give people exactly what they needed from me. I was a hall of mirrors, every surface reflecting something back, nothing inside. His name was Jordan. He moved to Riverside at the start of sophomore year, and he sat next to me in AP English because the teacher assigned seats alphabetically, and his last name was Alcott and mine was Ulford, which meant we were desk neighbors from the first day. Jordan was, I don't even know how to describe Jordan without sounding like I'm writing a romance novel, but I'll try. He was the kind of person who took up exactly the right amount of space. Not too much, not too little. He had dark hair that curled behind his ears and a habit of chewing on his pen cap when he was thinking, and he read actual books, not assigned books. But books he chose, books he carried around in his back pocket, books he'd recommend to you with genuine excitement like he was giving you a gift. He was also, I was almost certain, gay. Not because of anything obvious, not because of stereotypes, but because I recognized something in him, that same quality of careful watchfulness, that same practiced performance, that same distance between the person you showed the world and the person you actually were. I'd spent years developing a radar for it, the way people who have spent time in the dark learn to navigate by feel. We became friends. It was the most terrifying friendship of my life. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about being a closeted teenager who befriends another closeted teenager. The connection is electric and awful and wonderful all at once. We talked for hours. We talked about books and music and the particular loneliness of being in a crowded room and feeling like you're watching it through glass. We never talked about why we understood each other so completely. We circled around the center of the thing the way you circle around a fire, close enough to feel the warmth, careful never to touch the flames. I was in love with him. I know that now. I didn't have the language for it then, or rather, I had the language but I refused to apply it to myself. I told myself it was admiration, brotherhood, the intensity of true friendship. I told myself so many things. We were 16. Junior year started in September, and by October I was coming apart. It happens, I think, when you've been performing for too long, when the costume starts to chafe. When the character you've been playing starts to feel less like protection and more like a prison. There's only so long a person can maintain a fiction before the fiction starts maintaining them, before you wake up one morning and realize you don't know where the performance ends and you begin. Jordan and I had got closer over the summer. We'd spent long afternoons at the public library, actual afternoons in the library, which in retrospect is the gayest thing I've ever done, and I was completely blind to it, reading and talking and arguing about things that felt enormous: justice, identity, what it meant to live a life that was actually yours versus a life that was assigned to you. We never talked about being gay. But in late September, something shifted. We were in Jordan's car after school. His parents had gotten him a used Honda Civic for his 16th birthday, parked outside the library because the library was our place, our neutral territory. The radio was on low, something soft and forgettable. The afternoon light was doing that October thing where it turns everything gold and slightly melancholy. Jordan said very quietly, staring straight ahead through the windshield, "Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong life?" The air went out of the car. I knew what he was asking, I knew it in my bones, and I had a choice, the choice I had been avoiding for years, to step toward the truth or step back from it. I stepped back. "Everyone feels like that sometimes," I said, casual, easy, practiced. He nodded slowly, didn't look at me, turned the radio up slightly. We drove home in silence, and I spent the entire night staring at my bedroom ceiling, hatting myself with a thoroughness and precision that I had never quite achieved before. 2 weeks later, Jordan started dating a girl named Melissa. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I want to tell you I was happy for him, that I understood, that I recognized in his choice the same impossible calculus I was making in my own life every day. Instead, I stopped sleeping properly. I started losing weight. I sat in classes and moved my pencil across paper and produced correct answers, and no one noticed that I was hollow because I had become so good, so devastatingly, skillfully good at appearing fine. My mother noticed. She always noticed. That's her particular superpower, that antenna she has tuned to my frequency even when I'm broadcasting nothing, even when the signal is silence. She started leaving things outside my door again, not just cookies, books sometimes, notes that said nothing significant, just little everyday observations, little offerings of normalcy. "The hydrangeas are coming back, I know you like them." that sort of thing, a way of saying I'm here, the world is still here, you are still here. I can't tell you how much those notes kept me from going completely under. But even my mother couldn't reach the thing that was really wrong. Because the thing that was really wrong had no name I was willing to give it. It had no address, no zip code. It lived somewhere in the center of me, behind all the walls, in a room I had never opened. The night it finally broke, the night the dam cracked for real, came on a Friday in November. It was after a football game. We'd won, which meant the usual post-game ritual. Loud music, someone's empty house, the particular chaos of teenagers celebrating with the sloppy, desperate enthusiasm of people who haven't yet learned that winning a high school football game is not, in the cosmic scheme of things, deeply significant. I was at this party, I was performing. I was doing what I always did, moving through the room like I belonged, laughing when I was supposed to laugh, holding a cup I wasn't drinking from because I'd learned early that alcohol loosened things in me I couldn't afford to loosen. And then I saw Jordan across the room. He was with Melissa. She was laughing at something he'd said and he was smiling. This smile I recognized as the practiced kind, the performed kind, the kind that doesn't start in the eyes. He looked across the room and found me, and for just 1 second, one tiny, devastatingly honest second, the smile fell away entirely. And what I saw underneath it was exhaustion. The exact exhaustion I felt every single day. I set my cup down and walked out the back door into the November cold, and I sat down on someone's back porch steps and I put my face in my hands. And I cried. Not dramatically, not the kind of crying that announces itself. The quiet kind, the kind that's been waiting a long time, that slips out through the cracks that you try to stop but can't because it's been building behind a wall for years and the wall has finally given way. I cried for about 10 minutes alone on those cold steps, with the sound of the party muffled behind me and the November sky absolutely huge and dark above me. And then I wiped my face and I went home. And I decided something. I decided that I couldn't keep doing this. Not this, not the walls, not the performance, not the costume I'd been wearing since I was 7 years old at a yellow Formica table, learning that some things you feel, you keep to yourself. I didn't know yet what the alternative looked like, but I knew, in the way you know things that are true in your body before your mind has caught up, that the alternative had to exist. My parents had been having problems for about a year by the time November of junior year arrived. I don't say this to make them villains. I say this because it's context, because context matters, because the guest room, that guest room where everything changed, exists in the story for a reason. My father and mother fought the way people fight when they've been holding things back for a long time and have forgotten how to let them out gently, in the corners of rooms, in the pauses between sentences, in the way dinner was silent now when it used to be loud. It was my mother who suggested I spend a few weeks at her brother's house, my Uncle Caleb's, while things settled at home. She framed it as a treat. Caleb had a bigger house, a pool, a separate guest room with its own bathroom. She said it with her eyes, saying something different, saying I'm protecting you from something, saying I'm sorry, this is the best I can offer right now. I packed a bag. Uncle Caleb lived about 20 minutes away. He was my mother's younger brother, 41, divorced, an architect who worked from a home office in a house full of books and interesting art, in the specific quiet of a person who has made peace with living alone. He had kind eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and a habit of asking questions and then actually listening to the answers, which sounds like a basic human skill, but I had discovered by that point was actually quite rare. He had a dog named Walter, an elderly basset hound with the energy level of a throw pillow and the emotional intelligence, somehow, of a therapist. Walter followed me everywhere in that house. I think he could smell the sadness on me. The guest room was on the second floor. It had a sloped ceiling and a window that looked out over the back garden and a bookshelf full of Caleb's architecture books that I had no interest in but found oddly comforting in their solidity, their weight, their certainty of existing. I had been there for 4 days when it happened. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting on the edge of the guest bed. I had come home from school. Caleb drove me every morning, picked me up every afternoon, asked me in the car how my day was and seemed to genuinely want to know, and I had gone straight upstairs and sat down and just stopped. I wasn't crying, I was past crying. I was in that space past crying where everything just goes very quiet and you sit with it. I had my sketchbook open on the bed beside me. I had been drawing Jordan's face without realizing it. I do that, draw unconsciously, the hand moving while the mind is elsewhere, and when I looked down and saw what was on the page, I closed the sketchbook quickly, violently, like slamming a door. I sat there. The afternoon light came through the window at a particular angle that turned the dust motes gold. Walter was asleep outside the door. I could hear his slow, foggy breathing. The house was quiet. And then there was a knock. Soft, almost tentative. "Hey Adam," Caleb's voice, "can I come in?" I almost said no. I had said no to almost everything emotional for my entire life. No was my default, my reflex, my first and fastest answer to any question that involved being seen. But something, exhaustion maybe, the accumulated weight of years, the 4 days of Caleb's quietly patient presence, the November light, Walter breathing outside the door, something, made me say yes. He came in without making it a big thing. That was the first remarkable thing about it. He came in the way you come into a room where someone is doing something ordinary. He didn't have the look on his face that adults get when they've decided to have a conversation. He didn't sit down across from me with his hands clasped and his expression arranged into careful concern. He just came in and sat down on the edge of the bed next to me, leaving a comfortable gap of space between us, and looked at the window for a moment. Walter waddled in behind him and collapsed onto the floor with the sigh of someone who has just completed an enormous journey. We sat in silence for maybe 2 full minutes, and I want you to understand, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the first silence in recent memory that didn't feel like something trying to fill itself. It was a silence that was actually okay. Then Caleb said, "I see you, Adam." Not "I see that something is wrong," not "you seem upset," not "do you want to talk about it," with all the pressure and expectation packed into that question. Just "I see you." 4 words, present tense, no conditions attached. I felt it happen before I understood what was happening, that physical sensation of something internal giving way, some structural thing that had been holding weight for years suddenly unable to hold it anymore. My eyes filled. I blinked hard, looked at the window, blinked again. "I'm fine," I said, old reflex, muscle memory. "I know," Caleb said very gently, "you're very good at fine." And that is what broke me completely open. Because he wasn't asking me to be a different version of fine. He wasn't trying to catch me in anything. He was simply nomming what he could see, that I was performing fine and that he saw through the performance and that he wasn't afraid of what was underneath it. The tears came, not the quiet Friday night porch steps kind this time, the other kind. The ugly, graceless, years in the making kind. The kind that comes from so deep in the body it's almost like being sick. The kind that doesn't care that you are 17 years old and male and have spent your entire life perfecting the art of not crying in front of anyone. I cried like a child. I cried like the 7-year-old at the Formica table who had first learned to be afraid of his own feelings. I cried like the 13-year-old in study hall who had looked up from his history textbook and recognized himself for the first time. I cried like every version of myself that had ever swallowed something down and smiled through it and said "I'm fine" when asked. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't move closer, which was the right instinct. He didn't turn it into a hug before I was ready for one. He just stayed, present, solid, breathing evenly beside me, a steady anchor in the storm of my own unmade self. Walter, from the floor, let out a long, doleful sigh that under any other circumstances would have been funny. After a long time, I don't know how long, time becomes strange when you're crying that hard. The storm passed. Not ended but passed, like a weather system moving through. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I was embarrassed. Of course I was embarrassed. 17-year-old boys raised in households like mine do not fall apart in front of people, even people who love them. "I'm sorry," I started. "Don't," Caleb said, firm but kind. "Don't apologize for that." I looked at him for the first time since he'd come in. He had taken his glasses off, they were in his hand, his thumb moving slowly over one lens, a habit I'd noticed. His eyes without the glasses were my mother's eyes, same shape, same particular quality of attention. "How long?" he asked, just that. I knew what he meant. I knew it immediately with a certainty that told me he had been careful with this, had chosen this exact phrasing because it could mean many things, because it gave me the freedom to answer at whatever level of depth I was ready for. I thought about pretending I didn't understand the question. Then I thought about all the years of pretending. How long? Since I was 7, I said, at least. He nodded slowly, no surprise on his face, no alarm. That's a long time to carry something alone, he said. And those 11 words might be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me. Not it's okay, not everything will be fine, not are you sure, or how do you know, or any of the thousand deflecting, minimizing, complicating responses he could have given. Just a simple, dignified acknowledgement that is a long time, that is heavy, you have been carrying it alone. I didn't even have to name the thing, he didn't ask me to name it, he saw it and he saw me and that was enough. We talked for 3 hours. Well, I talked. Caleb mostly listened, which is its own extraordinary skill, one I have spent my adult life trying to learn. He listened in the way that creates space, the kind of listening that isn't waiting for your turn to speak. That isn't constructing a response while the other person is still talking. He listened as if what I was saying was the most important thing being said anywhere in the world at that moment. I told him about the Formica table and the newspaper going up. I told him about Tommy Weston and pine trees and the first lesson in hiding. I told him about the years of performance, about the football uniform and the girlfriend I never loved and the parties I moved through like a ghost wearing a very convincing human costume. I told him about Jordan, not everything, not the love part, not yet, but about the library afternoons and the question he'd asked in the car and the smile I'd seen fall from his face at the party and recognized as a mirror of my own. I told him about the Friday night on the back porch steps, about the crying that came out of nowhere, about the decision I'd made, the half decision, the shapeless one that I couldn't keep doing this. And then, finally, because he had earned it, because he had sat in this room for 3 hours in the November afternoon light with Walter snoring on the floor and received every word I said like it mattered, I said the thing I had never said to another living person. I'm gay. 2 words. 2 words I had carried in my body like a stone for 10 years. I felt them leave me and I felt I can only describe it as this. I felt lighter, not fixed, not healed, not solved, but lighter in the specific way a backpack feels lighter when you take out a heavy textbook you've been lugging around unnecessarily. Caleb looked at me, and he smiled. Not a big smile, not a performance of acceptance, just a small, warm, real smile, the smile of someone who is genuinely glad in a quiet and uncomplicated way that you've arrived somewhere safe. Thank you for telling me, he said. That was it. No, I always knew, no, this doesn't change anything. No speech, no reassurance cascade, no need to process it out loud in a way that would have been more about his own feelings than mine. Just thank you for telling me. I think about those words a lot still, about how exactly right they were, about how they placed the weight of the moment where it belonged with me in me as something I had done, something I had chosen, something that belonged to me. Thank you for telling me. Like I had given him something valuable, rather than handed him a problem to solve. After Caleb left the room that evening, after dinner, after Walter got his walk, after the kind, ordinary machinery of the household reasserted itself, I sat alone in the guest room with the lights off and the window dark and the garden invisible below. I tried to take stock of what I felt. The expected feelings were there. The fear was absolutely still there, a whole constellation of it, fear about my parents and school and football and every part of my life that would now have to be reconsidered in light of a truth I had finally admitted out loud. Fear about Jordan. Fear about the future, which suddenly looked like a country I'd been planning to visit under a false passport and now had to enter as myself. But underneath the fear, underneath it, the way warm water exists beneath ice, there was something else. Relief. Such enormous oceanic, almost physical relief. I hadn't known how much of my energy was going into the maintenance of the fiction. I hadn't known because I had never experienced the alternative, but sitting there in the dark in Caleb's guest room I could feel the difference, could feel the machinery powering down, could feel the constant low-grade hum of performance going quiet. I was so tired I hadn't known how tired. I lay back on the bed and stared at the dark ceiling and I thought, okay, so that happened, so that's real now, so someone in the world knows the truth of you. And the world had not ended. The house was still standing. Walter was still snoring somewhere. Caleb was downstairs. I could hear the quiet sounds of him making tea. The November night outside was enormous and cold and completely indifferent to the fact that I had just rearranged the entire architecture of my life. The world had not ended. I think I laughed a little at that, just quietly, alone in the dark. The way you laugh at something that is also slightly terrifying. The laugh of a person standing at the edge of something vast and realizing the edge is not as dangerous as they'd thought. I told my mother 3 weeks later. I had gone home by then. My parents' situation had settled into a careful, provisional truce, the kind that might hold or might not, but at least had stopped being actively explosive. The house felt like a held breath, but it was my house, my bed, my yellow formica table that I now understood as the site of my first lesson in silence. I chose a Sunday morning. My father was at Marcus's baseball scrimmage. My mother was in the kitchen doing the crossword puzzle with her reading glasses on and a cup of tea going cold beside her. I sat down across the table from her. She looked up, the antenna immediately activated. "Mom," I said. She set down her pen. "I have to tell you something." She said nothing. She took her reading glasses off and folded them carefully, placed them on the table, and looked at me with those eyes, those same eyes as Caleb, my mother and her brother sharing the same particular quality of attention. "I'm gay," I said. "I've known for a long time, and I'm telling you because I can't keep pretending. I'm so tired of pretending." My mother was quiet for what felt like a very long time. Then she said, "My baby." Not in a sad way, not in a pitying way. In the way you say a person's name when you've been looking for them and have finally found them. "My baby." She got up from her chair and she came around the table and she held me and I let her, and the thing about my mother's hugs, the specific alchemy of them, is that they have always felt like the safest place in the world. Like a place where the performance requirement is suspended. Like home. We sat like that for a while. Then she said, "I want you to know that I love you. That is not a complicated sentence. That does not have conditions. I love you." I pulled back and looked at her. "Are you surprised?" I asked. She considered this with the honesty she always applied to real questions. "No," she said finally, "I think I've been waiting for you to tell me for a while. I didn't want to push." She paused. "Was I right to wait?" "Yes," I said, "I needed it to be mine to say." She nodded. "Then, your father is going to need some time." "I know. It's not that he won't get there. Mom, I know it's okay." And surprisingly, unexpectedly, it was. Not because I wasn't scared of my father's reaction. I am, but because I had already done the hardest part in a guest room in November and I knew now that hard parts can be survived. My father's reaction was complicated. He didn't yell. I want to dispel that fear for anyone who is carrying it because the anticipation of the yelling was worse than anything that actually happened. He went quiet. He went very, very quiet and he looked at the floor and he said he needed to go for a drive. He went for a drive. He came back 2 hours later and he sat down at the kitchen table across from me and he said, "I don't fully understand this. I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know if I ever will, but you're my son." He stopped there. I waited. "You're my son," he said again, as if trying the words out, as if measuring their weight and finding it sufficient. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the uncomplicated acceptance my mother gave me or the calm, certain kindness Caleb had offered. It was a man at the edge of something he hadn't prepared for, holding onto what he was sure of, the one thing he was sure of. "You're my son." It was enough, not everything but enough, a beginning. "I need to tell you about Jordan. Because this story has his name woven through it and I've been circling around the center of it, and you deserve to know what happened." I told him in January. Not everything at once. I told him first that I had come out, that I'd told Caleb, told my mother, was in the ongoing process of telling my father, and I watched his face do something complicated and private and extraordinary. He looked like someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and had just been given permission to exhale. We were in his car again, the Honda Civic, outside the library because some patterns are right. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then Jordan said, "Me too." 2 words. The same 2 words I had said out loud for the first time in that guest room. And I felt something I can only describe as the specific, overwhelming grief and joy of two people who have been standing on opposite sides of a wall for years, and the wall has finally come down and you can see each other, really see each other. And you are so relieved it almost hurts. We talked for 4 hours in that car, the library closed, the parking lot emptied. The night came down cold and clear around us and we sat there with the heat running and we talked, really talked, finally, without the careful circling, without the measured distance, without the performance. He told me about the girl in his old town who'd found out and told people and what that had cost him. He told me about Melissa and how kind she was and how guilty he felt, how he'd broken up with her in November and how she had, remarkably, guessed the reason and been unexpectedly gracious about it. I told him about the Friday night on the back porch steps, about the corn flakes in the newspaper, about my mother's notes left outside the door, about the guest room in Caleb and the 4 words. "I see you, Adam." Jordan was quiet when I said that. "That's what you needed," he said finally, "that specific thing." "Yes." "Someone to just see you, without it being a crisis." "Yes." He was quiet again, then, "I'm sorry I couldn't do that for you, I was too busy not seeing myself." "I know," I said, "I couldn't do it for you either." We looked at each other. What happened between Jordan and me after that night is its own story, and a longer one, and this isn't quite the place for all of it. What I'll tell you is this: we remain friends. We remain friends to this day. The romantic love I felt for him at 16 has transformed into something different and arguably more durable. The particular love of someone who knew you when you were still becoming, who witnessed the becoming, who was in his own becoming at the same time. He came out at school in the spring of junior year. It was not drama-free, I won't pretend it was. There were people who said unkind things. There were people who were cruelest precisely because they'd been closest, which is a particular kind of wound that takes a long time to heal. His parents, especially his father, struggled in ways that made my own father's complicated silence look like a warm embrace by comparison. But there were also people who surprised him, people who showed up, people who revealed themselves as allies with a quiet steadiness that you don't know to expect until you need it. And there was me. I came out at school shortly after him. Not because I was brave, I want to be clear about this, because I think false bravery narratives are their own kind of harm. I came out because I was tired, because the performance had cost me so much for so long, because I had sat in a guest room in November and said the truth for the first time and survived it, and I knew now in my bones that truth was survivable. The football team, my team, the people I had performed beside for years, was mixed. Some were awkward, a few were actively unkind, but a surprising number were simply fine, just fine, the way most human things are when you get past the fear of them. Marcus, my brother, the golden one, the one who had always lived so easily in the world, called me from college when my mother told him. "Bro," he said, "like obviously." "What do you mean obviously?" "Adam, you cried at that dog food commercial in 2019. I've been waiting for this conversation." I laughed, genuinely, fully, from somewhere real. "I love you," Marcus said. Nothing's different at all." I'm 23 now. It has been 5 years since that Tuesday afternoon in November, since the door opened and Caleb walked in and sat beside me on the edge of a guest bed and said 4 words that rearranged my life. "I'm studying design at university. I found my way to it finally, that sketchbook talent that I spent years suppressing because it didn't fit the performance. I draw constantly. I design things. I make things that exist in the world and have shape and form and intention. I live in an apartment that belongs to me, small, slightly chaotic, full of books and plants and a print of a painting I love. I have a cat named Tuesday because of course I do, because what else would I name her? My father and I have dinner together once a month. He asks me about school, he asks about my friends, he doesn't ask about my love life and I don't offer it, and that is the particular truce we have arrived at: imperfect, evolving, still becoming. He loves me. I know that with a certainty I could not have articulated at 17. His love has conditions I didn't ask for, but it's real and we are both slowly learning to build a bridge between his world and mine. My mother and I talk every Sunday morning. She does the crossword puzzle. I tell her about my week. She always asks about Jordan. She has a soft spot for Jordan, has since she met him. She tells me about my father's progress, small victories she notices, shifts she catalogs with the patient attention of a scientist tracking something slow-moving but real. Caleb and I have dinner every few weeks. He asks questions and actually listens. He has met my friends. He has met people I have dated. He is, I don't have a better word for it, my person. The person who unlocked the door from the inside by simply refusing to pretend it was locked. Walter died last spring. He was very old and he went peacefully, which is all you can ask for a dog named Walter who did his job so well. I cried at the news more than felt entirely reasonable, and then I decided it was completely reasonable and cried some more. Jordan is in Boston now, studying law. We text daily. We visit twice a year. He is one of the most remarkable human beings I have ever known, not despite the years of hiding, but in some complicated way because of them. Because people who have lived inside their own silence develop a particular kind of listening, a particular quality of empathy, a particular radar for other people's pain. He's going to be an extraordinary lawyer, I've always known that. He is dating someone, a man named Felix, who makes him laugh in a way I have watched expand him, open him, teach him new dimensions of himself. I have met Felix twice. Both times I have felt that specific happiness that you can only feel for people you truly love when you see them loved well. I want to talk, before I end this story, about what I know now that I didn't know then. I know that closets are not made by hatred alone. They're made by love with conditions. They're made by fathers who hold newspapers up because they don't know what else to do with the alarm they feel. By culture and religion and the casual cruelty of language and the terrible arithmetic of belonging, the calculation every child makes, however unconsciously, what can I be and still be loved? I know that the answer is not to blame the people who built the closet. Most of them built it out of their own fear, their own smallness, their own imperfect love. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't erase the cost, and the cost is real, is lasting, is paid in years and energy and versions of yourself that had to be abandoned. But blame is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as excusing, and I am interested in understanding. I am interested in what actually happened and why, because I think that's the only thing that prevents it from happening the same way again. I know that it gets better, that phrase, worn smooth from overuse, that has been applied to gay teenagers like a bandage to a wound, but I want to complicate it slightly, because it doesn't get better automatically. It gets better because of specific people and specific moments and specific words said in specific rooms on specific Tuesday afternoons. It gets better because of people like Caleb, who knock softly on closed doors and don't demand anything except to be let in. It gets better because of people who see you. I know that I see you is not a small thing. It is not a passive thing. Seeing someone truly seeing them in the way Caleb saw me is an act of will. It requires the willingness to look at what is actually there rather than what is comfortable or convenient. It requires patience and steadiness, and the courage to sit in the discomfort of someone else's pain without rushing to fix it or diminish it or redirect it. It is one of the most powerful things one human being can offer another. And it costs almost nothing. A Tuesday afternoon, an open door, 4 words. Epilogue. What I want you to know. If you are watching this and you are in that guest rooms, not literally, but in the way I mean it, in that place of carrying something heavy and alone and unspeakable, I want you to hear me. I see you. Not what you're pretending to be, not the performance, not the practice smile, not the fine I'm fine that you've gotten so good at. I see the thing underneath. I see how long you've been carrying it. I see how tired you are. And I want you to know, with the full conviction of someone who has stood exactly where you are standing, that there is a guest room waiting for you. There is a Caleb. There is a Tuesday afternoon and a soft knock on the door and 4 words. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they exist, they are real, and they are coming for you. The world does not end when you tell the truth. I know it feels like it might. I know the fear is enormous and specific and sits in your body like a physical weight. I know the performance has become so second nature that you've almost forgotten it's a performance. I know the thought of laying it down is terrifying because you don't know who you are without it. But here is what I learned in that guest room at 17. You are who you are underneath the performance. The real thing, the tender, frightened, exhausted, magnificent real thing has been there the whole time waiting. It has not gone anywhere. It cannot be practiced out of existence or smiled away or performed into non-being. It is you, it has always been you. And you deserve to live as that person. You deserve doors that open. You deserve to be seen. You deserve every single Tuesday of your life to take up exactly the amount of space that you actually occupy. Nothing more, nothing less. Just you. Fully at last and without apology. Just you. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're going through something similar, or if you know someone who is, please leave a comment below. You are not alone. You have never been alone. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.